Hey folks, editing Jason here. So once again, I had some issues with OBS. The quality of the stream came in really well, but for some reason, my mic came in really low. And so I had to fiddle with OBS and SteelSeries once again to get them talking to each other. I managed to troubleshoot the issue, but that doesn't help with the quality of the recording, and I do apologize for that in advance. Welcome, everybody. This is Jason, and the name of this week's workshop is What's on the Menu? This looks like an interesting one, and so my good friend William is going to present it.
Thanks, Jason. So, yeah, as you say, this is What's on the Menu, a workshop. Actually, will be a workshop. I will be embarrassing myself writing code on dynamic menus. So, what's a dynamic menu? There are menus that we're usually all au fait with when you click on an object, a lamp to turn it on and off, or a painting to interact with it. Most of those interactions are static. They just interact with the object, but we can also have dynamic menus that construct themselves depending on who's in the room. So when you ask someone to join you, the people who can join is limited to the people on the lot, and that is created dynamically from who's on the lot, hence a dynamic menu. There are two types of dynamic menus. One is when you click on a sim and you ask them to kiss someone or whatever, and the other one is when you click on an object and you interact with that. Now, we will look briefly at sim dynamic menus, but we're going to spend most of our time looking at object dynamic menus. And dynamic menus are created from primitive add change the action string 0032 and the MakeActionString primitive string set string resource 012e, and we'll be looking at those So very briefly, we're going to look at sim dynamic menus, because if I say, oh well, dynamic menus only relate to objects, somebody's going to turn around and say, what about a sim? Well, sims are objects, but they operate differently. They are displayed when you click on a sim, player directed, or when one sim interacts with another, autonomous interaction. They are mostly used for social interactions, so the hug, flirt, kiss, give gift, OSB sales, and all of those things. Some modders have also used them for ultimate interactions, so there is an adjust, change your body hair overlays, change into clothes, where the selected sim is the person you clicked on or the sim you clicked on. They are constructed very differently from an object dynamic menu, because you have to create an off-world object of sim type 7, you have to put it in a special category, you set it up so it just loops, you then have to write special TTABs. One must be called CT object menu, and that takes the role of a TTAB's guardian, and that works out who you can interact with or what the interaction is. And then there's a CT object menu command which takes the roles of a TTAB's action you have, and that action's what you did. They are fairly complex objects, and they're probably well beyond the scope of a 1-hour workshop. So we're going to concentrate on their easier sibling, TTAB dynamic menus, because all the same logic applies. And if we have time at the end, I'll come back and look at one that I created which does pretty much exactly what we're going to do in this workshop. So that said, TTAB. So a normal TTAB menu entry, hopefully we're all familiar with this. You have a single menu entry with some static text that says, view this painting, switch this lamp on. In this example, routine, go to the mailbox and fade out. We have some flags and flags 2, that control at a very high level who can do this interaction: toddlers, elders, teens, children, adults. We have an autonomy value that says whether you can whether it has to be sim directed or whether it can be done autonomously by a sim on the lot. We will usually have a guardian behave, but it's optional. and which allows us to put in extra logic. So if we want to say, well, you know, only adults who aren't servos can do this action. You can't do that on the flags, but you can limit it to only adults, and then in the Guardian behav you would test to see if the sim was a servo, and if so, not allow them to do it. And then when all is said and done, it runs off and executes an action. So we have one entry in the menu, does one set of checks to see if the person can, or the sim can action this, and then action behav that goes off and does what you selected. Dynamic menu entries look remarkably similar, but they can generate many menu items. So you still have a TTA that's displayed in SimPE, but it doesn't actually appear on the game. Your flags 2 and autonomy will behave the same. The dynamic menu will always have a Guardian behav, and the action behav then works out what's going on. The Guardian behav is different in that instead of it taking a string from the TTAS and displaying that, it uses these add change the action string primitives, and we'll look at one in more detail on next slide, to add one or more entries. And the action behav then has to take information to figure out which one of the many entries you clicked on. So we'll look at one of these. So this is a very, very simple example that I could find. Your dynamic menu, as usual, receives two parameters, parameter 0, what object did you click on, parameter 1, am I autonomous? So nothing has changed yet. What happens in the test is we don't say things like, you can say things like, am I a servo? But this one, we iterate over all the people on the lot. Yeah. So this set to next. Find the next person on the lot. We're going to do some magic of shoving their stack object ID into temp0, and then we call this add change the action string env sim $object. Now, because we put the sim's OID, or the sim's OID is in stack object, this $object will come out as their name. So if we've got Fred, George and Bert on the lot, the first time round we will find Fred, and it will add us an action string of env sim Fred. The loop will find George. It will then add a menu on the object that is environment sim George. We go back around the loop, we find Bert. We set that one up, and then don't find any more people on the lot, and we exit. So this one Guardian behav has added 3 entries to the menu's object, one for each of the people on the lot. Some things to note about the primitive. This is one of the few primitives that has node versions. This was something we looked at in the behav editor, I think. And I would recommend that you use node version 1 or 3. Probably 1. Strings it pulls out, it retrieves not from the TTAS, but from this string resource of 12E. We'll look at that. One of the important things to remember when using this primitive is that the programmers that wrote the primitive count from 1, whereas the people that wrote the string table count from 0. So when you ask the primitive for the string at index 1, it's counting from 1, so that is the first entry. The entries in the string resource are numbered from 0, so the first entry is the one numbered 0, so that's the one it's pulling out. So you see how you get this weirdness that a 1 there refers to a 0 here. All you need to do is remember is that the primitive is 1 higher than the string table. Thank you, Maxis. The menu item is selected. It's like, well, how do I know? I only had 1 entry in the TTAB, and that's only going to 1 Guardian behav hooked up in the TTAB. How do I know what menu item the sim selected? And what we receive in the dynamic menus action bhav is we get two parameters. Parameter 0, unlike for a normal menu entry, is not the object that was clicked on, it's whatever was in the stack object when you called the add change primitive. So if we go back to this one, our stack object is representing our person, our sim on the lot. So the stack object, when we get to the action, will be Fred, George, or Bert. So that's one way of knowing what option was selected. The other parameter that we get is whatever was in temp naught when this add change the primitive was called. And that is useful because if we go and look at this primitive here, as well as having a fixed number that we're getting out of the string table, we can say use whatever was in temp naught when we called it. So we can loop over entries in the string table. That's what we'll be doing when I start writing code. So between stack object and temp naught, you can work out what option was selected of the multiple ones generated. So, very brief overview. What we're going to try and do is I'm going to try and declutter Jason's test pose box 2. If you were here for when he was doing pose boxes, at one point he clicked the move up button 29 times to move the animation of getting onto the tractor or riding the bicycle up so it was in the right place that he wanted it on the TTAB. And there were so many placeholder entries that you skipped over and so many other things. But a big chunk of what was being skipped over was a set of non-changing entries about facial expressions. So we're going to try and do those in a different way. We're also going to reduce the number of bhavs, because a lot of them are basically the same, they just changed some values, and we're going to move that out into beacons. We're going to use what is called data-driven code. So instead of having 40 bhavs, which are all different, we're going to have one bhav that takes its data from 40 entries, one of 40 entries in a beacon. This should theoretically make it easier to document how to add a new facial expression, because we're only adding a new string and some entries to a beacon about animations, and you don't have to edit, clone scary bhavs. So, with that said, we're going to switch. Let's watch William make a fool of himself. So on the resource post, I leave a copy of Jason's test pose box 2. And just as a quick recap, if we look in the TTAB, this, I'm just going to pull up my cheat notes as well. ETAs. We've got some placeholders. We've then got these model poses, the sick wheelie, driving the tractor. Lots of placeholders, lots of placeholders, lots of placeholders. Then somewhere down here we get the face overlays, basic, neutral. We've got some NSFW ones as well, and then a lot more placeholders. And what we're going to do is try and reduce that. If we look at the TTAB for it, again we've got the model poses, the sick wheelies, the driving the tractor, but then we've got all of these face overlays, and the problem happens is if you add a new entry to here, it comes right at the bottom, and if you want it to appear for the face overlays on the new options, you've got to move this thing up. I think I counted there are 29. So we're going to try and reduce that.
29 sounds about right. For the
so that's
ones.
That's the challenge. That's the challenge. So if we hop back into the ETAs, what we want to do is we want to take all of these strings, or most of these strings, out of the TTAS resource here, and we need to chuck them into a string hash, a string set resource. Now, you may not know you can do this, but if we take these TTAs and we click export language, we can tell them to save this. Call it face poses txt. And we have exported them. If I now find these, cheat sheet across on the desktop, poses.txt, we have a human readable form of what all these strings are. First two lines we need to keep. We want to delete everything to the first. There are a lot of them. There we go. On that, stop all faces. All of those. And then we don't want any of the placeholders at the end. So that's what we want. So that's now just the face poses. Save that. Back into SimPE. Going to just clone. It's fairly easy. We need to make that resource 12E because that's the one it reads from. This will be I could spell strings. Delete the two that are there, and then we've got import language. If we look for face poses, yep. Save typing them all in. So what I've done is I've taken all of those TTAS entries and pulled them up into this different string set.
That's really handy.
What we're going to notice here is that there are 40 of these. The last entry is 40. We have to remember that the first entry is 0, therefore there are 41 entries in this file. Don't forget to commit it. Just need to move my cheat sheets back over the other side so I can read it. So we've moved the strings out of the TTAs and we've got our string set. However, we need to remember that there are 41 of those, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create myself a lovely beacon. Resource, define. Constant. Filling that one out, add a value. The value I'm going to put in there is the number of entries that we had. Could code that later on and just say it's 41, but then if I ever wanted to add more face overlays or different set of style of face overlays and I wanted another 50 of them, I'd have to go into the code and find it. If I put them in a beacon, it's just easier to find it. And I'm going to be good. I'm going to create labels for that as well. Cool. Face overlay. Cat. So we've got our list of face overlay strings and we know how many there are. We now need to create a beehive. Oh god, this will be exciting. So these was I grabbed 1200 says. I'm just grabbing a small beehive and I'm going to clone it because it's easier to clone one than create one from scratch. I'm going to remove all the code out of this in a second, so that this corresponds to what I've done earlier. We don't actually want any of this code, so we'll get a shot of most of it. Right. Okay, so this is our dynamic, this is our guardian behav. So this is the thing that has to generate all the menu entries on this pose box for face overlays. If you remember, it took 2 arguments. So we'll give it 2 arguments. I'm also going to need 1 local just to keep track of what I'm doing. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a note of how many strings there were into my local. So local naught set equal to whatever was in my beacon goal. Would have helped if I'd given it correct resource number, wouldn't it? Seeing who was awake. Try that again. That's better. So it's finding my value of 29, which should be 41 in decimal. So that's the number of times we're going to go around a loop. We're going to add on our true. We're going to use temp 0. And the reason we're going to use temp 0 is, if you remember, we can use that as an index into the string table for our add change the action string. So things around. Temp 0 is going to be equal to literal 0. Now, bizarrely, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm immediately going to add 1 to that. All will become clear in a minute. So on true, and we are going to immediately add 1. So we're going to set it to 0, then we're going to add 1. So we're now on 1. Well, we know when we put that into the add change the action string, that will now be out entry 0 from the string tables. So now is a good time to do our change the action string, which is 32. I'm going to leave it at node version 0 for the moment, and I'll show you what the difference is. So for node version 0, this thing here, disabled false, is grayed out. That was a new feature that was added. If we change this to node version 1, go back into the wizard, this disabled false also has propagating and non-propagating on there as options. This is how you can create grayed out menu entries on an object. So if you were having something and you could set if you had a time setter and you could set it to 1 PM, 2 PM, 3 PM, 4 PM, 5 PM, and it was already 6 PM, you could still leave 6 PM on the menu but have it grayed out, and then 7 PM, 8 PM, 9 PM, 10 PM, PM. So that's what node version 1 gives you, but generally I'd just use node version 1. In our case, we're not using an index, we're a fixed index into this. We're going to use whatever is in temp 0. Say if I wanted the first string here, this is index 1 is entry 0, 2, 3, but we're not doing that. We're going to use our whatever is in temp 0. And what we're then going to do is we will add another expression. Change that back to 0. Clear out all of edit this. So what we're going to do now, we'd stuck into local naught however many entries there were in our string table, which was 41. So I'm going to use this weird thing down here, which again we looked at in the bhav editing 101. Minus, minus, and greater. So let's take a closer look at that. Let's do it this way. So local 0 is going to start off at 41 because that's what's in that constant, the number of menu entries we have. We're going to set temp 0 to be 0. We're then going to add 1 to it, so the first time round it's going to be 1. We're then going to add the menu entry that is at index 1, so that will be our stop. We then are going to say decrease local 0, so it's going to go from 41 to 40 first time round. And if it is greater than 0, i.e. we haven't finished, we want to go back to line 2. That's why we incremented it at 1. So now our temp 0 goes from 1 to a 2, and we will get the second entry. We'll run down, we'll stick that out, we will decrease our count from 40 to 39, it's still greater than 0, we'll hop back up to line 2. We're now looking at temp 0 having a value of 3, we get our third entry, we will decrease all the way down until this hits, we were on 1, locals 0 has a value of 1, we will go through, we'll add the very last entry, we will decrease it, it will go to 0, and it is now false, it is now not greater than 0. So our false entry, the condition is false, we need to exit from our action bhav. When you exit from an action bhav, if you exit with the value of true, it's told the game system that you've added items to the menu. If you exit with a value of false, you are effectively saying I added no menu entries. And that, with a bit of luck, should give us what we want. What we need to do is we now need to hook that up into our TTAB. So if we look into our TTAB, we've got all these face overlay things here. So hang on. Need to nick one of the placeholders. Just going to grab that early one. So, face overlays. I like to put dynamic in it to remind me that the thing is being generated. Back in my TTAB. There's our one that says stop all faces, so I'm going to change this to our that says face overlays dynamic. Now, having done that, my guardian bhav is now up on the other side of the screen, so we'll type it in. Yeah. Don't know why visitors can do this, and I don't know why babies can do this. Makes not a lot of sense to me. But what we've got is this one TTAB entry is running some dynamic code that's going to generate 41 new entries. Now, to prove this, I'm very bravely going to delete all of these. This is easier to do from the end. Oh, they go. Oh, Jason's hard work going. We now only have one menu entry, and just for the sake of completeness, unfortunately there's no easy way to delete things out of the TTAS entries. Down to the end, deleting from the end. Click delete a lot of times,
Right,
and
hence
we'll wait
all
for
of
this.
the placeholders.
Yep, don't need any of the placeholders.
The thing is that if you delete the ones above, for example, the action strings for the poses in the t-test, then you would probably have to reassign the names of the action poses in the t-test.
Well, you were creating a you were changing placeholder into something. So all the ones above the face poses were just there to push the face poses into the right place. I can delete all of these because your action for adding, driving a Jeep is now add a new entry, driving Jeep, clone the bhav, put it into the TTAB. You don't need all those extra entries in there.
Could that be done with the action poses as well? Could you have multiple dynamic menus in one pose box?
You could, but you're you can, but the way that you were adding to it, you were adding an animation, you were creating an animation, you were adding an animation resource, you were adding an animation string entry, you were doing that. That was all very logical as to, I do this, I add one of these, I add one of these, I add one of these, I add one of these. I can kind of understand it all. Whereas the, oh yeah, and now I've got to move it over 50 face poses. It's kind of like, yeah, because they don't change. Those face poses are not related to the animation box as such.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So I wouldn't necessarily change all those things around. So if I've committed that, so if I save all of this, we're now going to see how badly I've broken it. So, I can remember where the pose box was. Hobbies misc. There. Should be what I just hacked. So, I've still got face overlay, basic, all of these. And I've got all of the sex faces still. However, if I tried to run it, it would break spectacularly because I think they're all linked up to the stop. Come here, girl. You see how crap I am, Sims. Will is off. What? So if I take any of these overlays, basic, closed, you won't actually do anything because all of them are going back to the clearing of the face. So, but what I was trying to show was that the menu is still there, despite the fact from that pose box I had deleted all of the TTAS, I deleted all of the TTABs, so that is being generated dynamically. What we're going to do is we're going to quit out of there. So if we look at one of the things that one of the bhavs that the code was calling, when we do face overlay neutral, it's doing an animate overlay of this animation. We're doing anger, it's doing an animate overlay of that animation. Confused, different animation. We get into the SFW ones, we end up with two animations. They're composite overlays.
That's blending 2 or 3 expressions.
Yeah. So, having known that, I'm just noting that so that, because what we're going to do, if we look at this, what this animate overlay is doing is it's using animation 99. It's using animation 5. If we go and look at disgusted one, it's using animation 9B. So the only thing that's differing there is the animation string that we're using, and we can see those if we go and look at the string adult anims. They're all down here between these values. So because we know which menu string we selected, 0 to 40, we can use that information to pick up which animation string we want to use from a couple of beacons. So I could go through and create a beacon that says if you pick animation 1 or menu item 1, you need animation 99. If you put menu item 2, you need animation 9A. If you pick 3, you need 9B. Some of them are duplicates, so we need 2 entries. We need 2 beacons, and that's what we're going to do. Create 2 beacons. Now, before this, and because it's very boring, I actually went in, created a spreadsheet, copied them all down, noted what they all were, wrote them all out, and created 2 beacons before, which are those 2. 4, I came here. So I now have a beacon here that says if you've picked animation or menu entry 7, the animation you want is 9E. If you've picked the next one, the animation you want is 9F. We come down and look at the NSFW ones. You want animation 99. Well, that's the first one, or entry 36. If we look in my second beacon, look at 36. The other one you want is A6. So it's a blending of the 2. So we want to use the menu item selected as an index into this beacon to call up the correct animation we want, animation string. So we're now going to try and write that behave, so that will be even more fun. Start with that one. Clone it. Call this 10F. Face overlay done. We get 2 arguments, 2 parameters. The first one is the stack object, the second one is whatever was in temp 0, and we're going to need to, of course. So I'm going to use most of this code. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab to temp 0 what came across in parameter 1. Parameter 1 being the index in the string entries of the face overlay that I wanted. Now going to do some magic. If I can type insert true first. I'm going to grab into my local port entry from a beacon table. Now most of the times we use this thing here const, but if we keep scrolling down you see there's a const square temp bracket. So I'm going to pull out of const of beacon 1002 whatever temp 0 is indexing. I'm using temp0 as an index into my beacon to get a value out based on the string menu entry the sim selected to take. I'm also going to pull out into local 1. I don't know if my temp0 will get corrupted at some point, just like shoving these in locals, whatever was in 3. So I've now got the 2 animation strings that may or may not be used. I set up beacon 1003 so to have all zeros if it wasn't needed. So we're now going to do this standard temp1 equals literal f, which just says loop until the sim dies, basically. And if you were at the of my previous ones, I said you should never ever ever assign a value back to a parameter because you will forget you did it. What we're going to do is we're going to take the value out of local 0 and we're going to shove it in parameter 1. Now this makes absolutely no sense until we look at the next line. On our animate overlay, we can either pull animation string as a number, but if we tick this thing down here, anim string index in param, we can make that look in parameter 1. Can't use a local. You can't say pull the animation string out of whatever is in local 1. You can't do it. You have to use a parameter. This is about the only time you will ever set a parameter. So that's fine. That will do our first one. Need to think about what's happening with if we had a possible second one. So just going to insert that on, shove that down the end. So we've done our first animation. We're not going to exit. We're going to go to the next line down. What we're going to do here is we're going to look at whatever is in local 1, because that was the other thing that I grabbed out. So if local 1 is not equal to literal 0, we have a blended animation to do. So we have a second animation. So we need to hop on to 7. But if it is 0, we can exit at this point and we can just quit with true. In this case, what we want to pull out into parameter 1 is now the second animation, and we've stored that in local 1. So that goes on to 8. And then we do our optional second animation, again using parameter 1 as an index to the string table to call the string. And that looks remarkably like the one I prepared earlier. So if we commit that, that's what it's doing. So it's getting the 2 animation strings based on menu item that was selected. It's running the first one, seeing if the second one needs to be run, and then it's doing the second one. And we need to hook that up to TTAB. So we go into Face Overlays Dynamic, 10FF there, commit that. So that is now using data from the beacon and whatever was selected to do an animation. Now this is my favourite bit, because we don't actually need any of these. Need any of those. Because all the data that was in those beehives is now encoded in the beacons. If we send to here, go and get our little accessory box. If all has worked correctly, She should have closed her eyes. And indeed she has. And send her to a sex face. Blew up. Worry about that. Would have to debug it. So only is she doing her overlays. I don't know if we got the menu. We've got the actions going as well. So we've tied the two together. What we've done is we've moved all of those static TTAs and BHAVs out into, which was all code based, we've moved it out into what is data driven. We have a beacon that says how many entries you have. Like you had a string table where we can change the overlays. So if we wanted a face overlay, I don't know, thinking, whatever, we could add more. If we wanted to add a new one here, add a new string, we would increase that by 1, and we would go into our beacons and we would add the animation strings on the end. Numbers that we wanted, 0 if we didn't want a second one. Or if we wanted if we'd found a different face overlay, we can look at our animation strings. We could use one of these placeholders at the end, which we actually no longer need. We could add a face pose in to B4. It might have come in some extra add-on that we've discovered, and add that. And all we're doing is we're editing some animation strings, we're editing some menu strings, and we're putting some values into beacons. We actually really don't care how the BHAVs work. We pretty much don't care anymore what this is doing, or what this one is working as. We're just driven off the data. Now, one of the things we haven't looked at in here, but I have got in the final one, is the stop all faces. This is a list of all of the animation strings, get called one after the other. Again, I'd do this as a loop. I'd say starting from animation string 98 through to animation string B3, just animate stop in a loop, starting here, going to there and stopping. And I would move those two numbers to this beacon. So if you added another animation string that had to be stopped, again, it's just turning a beacon value. I'll put up the final version that I've got of this. So that's how you can use dynamic menus to remove things. Now, I forgot to show you before I shut down my game, was I wrote a mod called face overlays, and it's not on there. Don't ask me why it's in X-rated. And I'd taken all of those same facial overlays and I'd created a sim dynamic menu. So again, there's a menu string which is under adjust facial expression, and then it's basic, anger, eyebrows, sex face, all of those.
So it's essentially the same concept, but in a sim menu instead of an object menu.
Yeah, same list. Same list of let me find the animation strings. Same list of animation strings, except they start at 0, not 9b. Same beacons. Up to 3 possibilities. 0 if they're not needed. General tuning, again in a single beacon. But because this is a it's a sim plugin, so it needs that special object type of 7, whereas a table lamp is object 4. This is a controller. It's, as I said right at the beginning, we started, it's being put in the correct category of social plugin controller, and this is how the game knows to run these objects to generate dynamic menus when you click on a sim. While it has a TTAB and a TTS resource, they're empty because all the magic is done in these two specially named bhavs CT object menu, which is the thing that does the add change the action string. Again, it loops over the strings. It knows how many there are. It loops over them and it adds them into the dynamic menu when you click on the sim. And then there's this CT object menu command, which picks up the parameters, works out if you're trying to remove all the face overlays or apply a face overlay. Those two subroutines, I split it out. Then this does the same. Animate overlay. Is there a second animate overlay? And actually allowed for 3 animate overlays. So under my adjust, I have facial expression. I have all of these closed. If we unpause that, we might be able to see her in the mirror. She's closed her eyes. Just facial expressions, remove all. Takes some time because it's got to remove them all. So this means that I don't need any of the facial expressions on the pose box because I can get to all of them by going just by clicking on the sim and saying I want that sim to have that facial expression. I don't have to have them all in the pose boxes. That's the difference between dynamic menus on an object and dynamic menus as a plugin controller, which end up on the sim. And that was it.